Welcome back, everyone, to the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo flying solo today. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach. Really wanted to have this conversation. I'm glad for all of you joining us here. I'm being joined today by Father Stephen Imbarrato. And let's be clear, and Father knows us here. We're not blowing smoke, okay? If you want to know what's going on with abortion, you talk to Father Steve, okay? Because he's going to give you the straight up. He's not going to sugarcoat anything because, quite frankly, there's nothing to sugarcoat. But having said that, all right, as people out there know, Joe Rasinello and myself, we're pretty well informed because we have a podcast. We have a radio show, okay? So we have to stay informed. I am confused. I am a pro-life Catholic American. I am confused in the post-Dobbs era thus far. I don't know who to look to, who to listen to on the political level and the constitutional level. I don't know what to do on the state level. It seems to me more chaotic. It was almost easier under Roe versus Wade. God forbid we don't want that, because at least now we have a say. But nonetheless, we want to have on the protest priest, Father Stephen Imbarrato. Father, before we even get started, before I ask the first question, please let everybody know the resources that you have available for them to find out even more than what we're going to discuss today.
Well, this discussion today, Joe, and thank you for having me on, is all about rallyforpersonhood.com, rallyforpersonhood.com. So everything we discuss, you can find at rallyforpersonhood.com, and you can contact me. Just as you and I are having a Zoom conference, really what I'm encouraging people to do is email me so we can set up Zoom conferences where I can orient small groups of people to what we're going to discuss today, right? And what we're going to discuss today, Joe, is why are you confused, right? It's not your fault. Why are people in the dark? It's not their fault. Where are we now in the Dobbs era, right? People seem to be actually not just in the dark or confused, they are actually being led down the wrong path. So, Joe, if you indulge me, can I read you the pertinent line out of the 14th Amendment, right? And then I really think if you get your mind, and if everybody listening, watching gets their mind around this, I think that the confusion will go away. The darkness will become light, and you'll start saying, wait a second, what is really going on here, right? So this is what let me put this in context. The 14th Amendment starts off describing persons who are citizens. Right, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state in which they reside. And no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. So now people are under this false a misconception that the 14th Amendment only pertains to citizens, because that's how the amendment starts. But then the next line is key, because it now switches gears and says, nor. So besides what we just talked about in terms of citizens, we're going to talk something else here. Nor shall any state deprive any person, not just citizens, person, right? They describe what a person, how a person can be a citizen, but now any person doesn't characterize citizen versus non-citizen. Nor can any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Right. So, in other words, you can't take somebody's liberty away unless you find them guilty of something where they violated the Constitution, where they violated the law, that then where they forfeit their right. Right. For instance, these felons, all right, cannot vote in certain states. Right. All right. So So it says, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. All right?
Right.
Any person. So the question becomes, what is a constitutional person? Now, at the time of the 14th Amendment, again, this is all at the website, rallyforpersonhood.com, Josh Craddock, Robert George, constitutional expert after constitutional expert, Hadley Arks, all talk about how at the time of the 14th Amendment, person always included children in the womb. When Ohio passed the 14th Amendment, they specifically talked about that. Judicial history of the United States, and Josh Craddock lays this out, that always, once life was detected in the womb, life was protected.
Right.
Okay. And if you look at, let's take a recent situation where in Arizona, the Supreme Court recognized in 1864 or 1865 law in Arizona that gave full rights, constitutional rights to babies from conception.
Let me
Babies in
cut
the
you off.
womb.
That's what they're trying to, there's a proposition. I'm in Arizona. There's a proposition on the ballot in a month that will undo that and do basically make the law
Well,
in Arizona what it is in New Jersey, California, New York, and the rest. Go ahead, brother.
but something happened interim to that. Okay, if you remember correctly, the Supreme Court recognized this law that basically was protection from conception.
Right.
And then, if you remember, your legislature, both houses of your legislature, by one vote, all right, tossed away that law. It said that 1864-65 law no longer existed. And that put you in the situation you're in today. And now you're facing, all right, abortion up to the day of birth because of the referendum, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So, but the fact is that law was on the books, all right, and Arizona recognized it. Ohio, so always prior to Roe versus Wade, once life was detected from the womb, life was protected throughout the United States in almost every state in the country. Okay. And now Dobbs, for us to say, and this is all you're hearing, right, is now, all right, the abortion issue is now up to the people. It's in the hands of the people. It's in the hands of the state. People, state by state, can now decide for themselves. Well, no, it clearly then is a contradiction to the 14th Amendment, where it says, no, nor shall any state, right, deprive any person of equal protection under the law.
Right.
Right. So my question is to the Supreme Court of the United States, you, Joe, me, Joe Resinello, every member of the Supreme Court, every person in the United States that has this right to life, this inalienable right to life endowed by our Creator that guarantees us equal protection under the law. At what moment did we receive those rights? We want the Supreme Court to answer that. Now, they should have answered it in Dobbs, and they decided not to. Why? Why didn't they answer it in Dobbs? They didn't answer it in Dobbs because, frankly, my opinion, they were afraid that being in 1858, post-Dred Scott, pre-Civil War America, right here in the 21st century, it would lead to civil unrest, right, and possibly, violence, right?
Right.
And the last time I was on your show, I laid out the scenario where I thought that it was leaked, right, by Roberts to show that, and again, this is my opinion, to show that indeed there would be a tremendous blowback. So he decided to take an incremental step. They were not intending to turn this into a states' rights issue. They sent it back to the states to create the national debate that existed in 1858 over slavery. The whole country was consumed and focused on the fact that there were free states and slave states, right? Lincoln's 1858 address, "A house divided cannot stand," right? The Lincoln-Douglas debates, the Missouri Compromise, Dred Scott decision.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what the Supreme Court was hoping to create, where the entire country then would look at this issue and say, wait a second, does personhood in the 14th Amendment pertain to unborn children or does it? But the debate never came about. And that is what I want to discuss today, using this Ryan T. Anderson, The Way Forward After Dobbs. He wrote it just a couple of weeks ago. It came out. And I've gotten in touch with him. I haven't. I reached out to him and I have not heard back from him. I'm a little bit upset. Ryan is what we call a professional pro-lifer, right? He is an academic. He is well-read. He is, it's amazing what he's written. And he says, even for those of us who believe the unborn are persons under the 14th Amendment, constitutionally entitled to equal protection, widespread recognition of that fact is not going to happen quickly. We need to lay the groundwork for success in the long term. Now,
Father,
Jim
real
Havens
quick,
and I,
repeat that. Repeat
all
that
right,
because you were breaking up a little bit. So just repeat that quote, if you don't mind, one more time.
sure. He writes on his first page, and even for those of us who believe the unborn are persons, so he believes the unborn are persons, under the 14th Amendment, constitutionally entitled to equal protection, so he agrees with me, right?
Mm-hmm.
He agrees with me. He says widespread recognition of that fact is not going to happen quickly. We need to lay the groundwork for success in the long term.
Okay.
And my response is, why not? Why is it going to take? Why isn't it going to happen quickly? Right? Why is it going to be long term? Why should we wait another 50 years? Right? I mean, the reason why the Supreme Court's not taking a personhood case is because nobody is demanding the Supreme Court answer the question that I just posited. Nobody's demanding it. Not one major player in the mainstream corporate pro-life movement is demanding the Supreme Court answer the question that I just put out there. And that, in essence, the problem. Why you're confused, why you feel you're in the dark, why we think it's a states' rights issue, right? And for some reason, they think that just because it took 50 years to overcome Roe versus Wade, that it's going to take another 50 years to implement or recognize the 14th Amendment for the preborn. And I'm saying, no, it can happen in a matter of weeks or months with the ability that we have. And this whole article is predicated on the fact that, we need to educate people. Well, we have Lila Rose, Kristen Hawkins, Margie Dannenfelser, Frank Pavone, Abby Johnson, Sean Carney, Lauren Mazuka, people I pray for every single day that they will awaken, unite, and start focusing in on this issue, rally for personhood, all right, and start educating pro-lifers that this is not a states' rights issue. Your inalienable right to life, my inalienable right to life, is not predicated upon nor derived from any state legislature or the will of the people.
Right.
And we are in a perfect, because he goes on to talk about the fact that we're 0 for 7 in these abortion referendums. You have this abortion referendum now. Up to 13 states are now in the middle of this. Florida, where I am, we're in the middle of this. These are teaching moments in 13 states, 20 if you want to count the ones that we've lost, right? Where we can just say, wait a second. These amendments, these referendums are unconstitutional because no state has the right let me finish. No state has a right to allow a group of persons in their state to vote on whether another group of persons in the state can be murdered or not. Right? Or am I
Yes.
misinterpreting what I just read to you?
No, no, absolutely not. But I guess I don't want to keep you all day, but I have several questions. One of which is this: put it like this. I do believe that someone somehow is going to answer those prayers, or God's going to answer those prayers, and someone is going to file a lawsuit, maybe here in Arizona, maybe in Ohio, and force this to the Supreme Court. Because I'm assuming that that's what you want to see happen: a legal action on the part of one of those groups or all of those groups to say, okay, Arizona, or just use Arizona. Arizona just passed their legislation. They want to enshrine in the Constitution abortion up to the moment of birth. Challenge that to the Supreme Court and force those justices to have to make a decision that you and I and Joe spoke about months ago, which is personhood. That was the question, not Roe versus Wade. But here's after my little rant. Here's my question, Father. And if you're just joining us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe, Father Imbarrato is joining me. We're talking about post-Roe America. I'll lay it out to you this way, and I'll throw it right back to you. The reason why the NRA is powerful is because they have a will to protect their Second Amendment rights. I don't see a will on the part of many people who call themselves pro-life to do the same damn thing when it comes to abortion and protection under the 14th Amendment. That's my view. I don't see a political will to do that. Am I wrong? Am I right? Do you agree?
No, you're absolutely right. And that's why Jim Havens and I are not focused. We are trying to create a grassroots movement to educate the average pro-lifer. But what we're really doing is confronting Lila Rose, who has 7 million followers, Margie Dannenfelser, Frank Pavone. The people that I named in the pro-life movement, all right, can contact overnight, 2-3 times overnight, every single pro-lifer in the country. They have the means, the ability to influence the USCCB, the Republican Party, the conservative movement. They have the means, they have the resources, they have the ability. Why are they not trying to influence or educate the people? And they all say that they're all about changing hearts and minds. They're all about education. That's what they say. I don't want to go down another path, all right, and criticize what they're educating their people about, but it's surely not personhood. But while we're trying to create this grassroots, as a matter of fact, Jim is going to Notre Dame next week, University of Notre Dame. There is actually an equal protection under the 14th Amendment conference. But they're talking about an amendment, right? And I think that that is what Ryan T. Anderson has in his mind, another amendment. But why do we need another amendment when we have the 14th Amendment? We don't need a law. We don't need an amendment. What we need is a court case. And the Supreme Court's not going to take a court case if the people are not demanding them take a court. There's plenty. We don't need to file suit, although I believe that every state that's had one of these referendums, all right, should file an injunction, should file a motion to have the referendum overturned, all right, and try to force it to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court can deny taking any of these cases. They can decide who they want, what they want to take, what they want to rule on. And they're not going to risk the abolition of abortion through constitutional personhood unless there's a groundswell, a demand, a clamor for it. You remember the first time I was on your show, I think we talked about the presidential executive order on personhood, where
Yes.
I convinced Trump to sign a presidential executive order on personhood. The purpose of that was not necessarily to abolish abortion, Trump abolishing abortion. It was creating a scenario through a presidential executive order where the Supreme Court, then 5-4, not 6-3, would be forced to rule on that presidential executive order and decide whether it was constitutional, whether personhood did exist in the 14th Amendment, etc. He made a decision to wait term. Now, that was a huge mistake. Now we've seen his whole mindset has changed over this issue, and we don't see the mainstream corporate pro-life movement doing anything to influence Trump back in the direction that he was in his first term. Although there is a school of thought that is saying, because you remember a couple of times he said, first we have to win. First we have to win. And he believes that he needs to take this wishy-washy position on abortion, all right, to overcome the Democrats' primacy in terms of using this issue as their winning issue, right? But there's no guarantee that once he becomes president, he's going to revert back to where he was before,
Right.
unless the mainstream corporate pro-life movement, everybody rises up and demands, all right, that he answer the simple question, that the Supreme Court answer that simple question, right? Under the 14th Amendment, when do we obtain our constitutional rights? I mean, that's
Right.
it. It's a simple. I was on the phone not 4 months ago with a constitutional lawyer, right? And I presented that question to him. I said, correct me if I'm wrong. I think his first name was David. I said, correct me if I'm wrong. Is it that simple or am I missing something? Is it as simple as we just want the Supreme Court to answer? He goes, Father, it doesn't get any simpler than that. The way you laid it out is as simple as it gets. We want them to answer that question. They're unwilling right now to answer that question, take a case that forces them to answer that question. And I believe the key that opens up the door is convincing Lila Rose and all the other people that I mentioned to day in and day out on social media, emails, every means they have at their disposal to educate the average pro-lifer like you, right? Like the people who are confused, who feel they're in the dark, who think it's a states' rights issue, to just lay it out as I laid it out, all right? And then say, all right, let's start getting in touch with the Supreme Court. Let's start crying. Let's start banging the drum, clanging the gong, all right? Let's go back to where we were in 1858, right? Where we were demanding that every state be a free state. We're demanding that. If you notice, in the debate the other night, and Jim Havens and I just did a radio show on the fact that Tim Walz, the vice presidential candidate for Kamala Harris, he even said this situation where we have states that are abortion states and states that have no abortion, that can't remain. That can't remain. Equal protection under the law. And that's why Kamala Harris and I want to codify abortion so it's free in every state and every woman can have an abortion in every state. Well, we should be applying that same mindset because we have the 14th Amendment. Abortion is unconstitutional according to the 14th Amendment, right? We're denying the constitutional rights of the preborn and we're mass murdering them.
Let me ask you a quick question because it's something I thought and I could be wrong. On the political level, I find because Trump kind of pivoted to the, like, if you want to call it the middle, and he was using different language than he did in his first term about abortion. But my response, or the way I was hearing it, was, okay, she's accusing him of wanting to impose a national abortion ban. They're going to codify it in federal law. According to Dobbs, neither one of them would be able to do that. Am I correct? Now, again, on a political level or on the level of sending it back to the states, that's kind of a fallacious argument on both sides because neither one would survive. Neither one would survive judicial scrutiny because in Dobbs, they sent it back to the states. So really, correct me if I'm wrong, Father, they couldn't do anything on the federal level. Am I correct?
Yes. And actually, I said, you remember when Biden, okay, so let's look at it in the context of a 6-3 Supreme Court, potentially 6-3 Supreme Court. You remember Biden said, all right, that if I win re-election when he was early on in his campaign, all right, I will have the Senate and the House pass unrestricted abortion, and I will sign that bill, and we will codify Roe versus Wade, all right, throughout the country. And I said back then that the fallacy in his thinking is at that point in time, all right, somebody, all right, would make a motion and try to get an injunction against that law in violation of the 14th Amendment. The Supreme Court would say, no, it's unconstitutional based on the 14th Amendment. And that is really how God works, right? He snatches victory out of the jaws of defeat, right? And how ironic that would be. But the other side knows. And the Supreme Court is a political animal. They're accusing the Supreme Court of being political. They want to stack the court, or they want to eradicate the court. They want the majority in the Supreme Court. So if that time comes when they pass that type of federal law, the Supreme Court will rubber stamp it.
Right.
Right. That's why our window is closing. This whole idea that we can wait, this whole idea that he's talking about, the long term, it's not going to happen quickly. It's got to happen quickly. It may not happen at all,
Right.
because the other side knows, they know what their Achilles heel is, and they know that if they take control of this government, all right, that it's the Supreme Court and it's the Constitution, it's their Achilles heel, and they'll do what their best to eradicate it and constitutionalize abortion by hook or by crook, even if it's not legit. And everybody knows they're willing to do everything and anything, lie, cheat, and steal, right? Because if you can kill babies every single day in good conscience, then you're capable of lying, cheating, and stealing, right? So the time is of the essence.
Don't we have? I mean, like, and everybody you mentioned that you pray for, okay, obviously I follow all of them and see what they're doing. What I would say to them, if I could shake them by the lapels, is say to them, look, forget about Roberts, okay? Just leave him aside for a second. I'll give you an unthinkable scenario. That in the state of New York, where they deny anybody, you, me, anybody, unless you're rich or unless you're a jeweler or something, the right to conceal and carry a firearm, okay? Obviously, in the city of New York, we know they're very liberal and anti-gun. That case got challenged, went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, you can't do that. That is, to me, an unthinkable thing, because the Supreme Court never waded into something like that. But somebody took legal action against that and said, no. Forget about Roberts, okay? He might as well be on the other side, except for certain corporate decisions, okay? But we have 5 Supreme Court justices, okay, that are willing to say, even in a case like that, where the unthinkable, you could conceal and carry in New York City because the Supreme Court said so. What makes you think that they won't turn around and say, at least those 5 justices, and turn around and say, the 14th father, if they wanted to quote you in their decision, Father Stephen Imbarrato is absolutely correct. The Constitution is very clear. All right. And we are going to protect life, and no state has the right to deprive life. Therefore, abortion in America is illegal, is unconstitutional. Why do they doubt that these Supreme Court justices would do that? Is my larger question, Father Stephen.
I don't think they're doubting it. I think that this Ryan T. Anderson is doubting it. I think that there's real reasons why the mainstream corporate pro-life movement is avoiding pushing it. And I think political influence, political expediency is a reason they are afraid right now that by pushing this, all right, that it's a losing political issue, and that indeed the Republican Party will get wiped out. I think this is foolish. I think that we are not trusting in Jesus, not trusting in God, right? Not trusting in his omnipotence, his ability to perform miracles. But there's other reasons why. The reasons that exist, and we went over this the last time I was on the show. There's 4 basic reasons, all right, that the other side is, our side is afraid of this. Abortifacient contraception, all right. If we recognize constitutional person from the moment of conception, what happens to abortifacient contraception? What happens to IVF? What happens to immoral experimentation, embryonic stem cell tissue research? And what happens to the potential criminalization of women who have abortions, right? Are they now murderers, right? And the pro-life movement is scared to have to defend those issues. And my position is, look, just as it took 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation and the 14th Amendment to come up with the civil rights legislation of the 1960s, it may take 100 years after you recognize constitutional person from the moment of conception to deal with abortifacient contraception. What happens to contraception? What happens to immoral experimentation? What happens to IVF? What happens? How does it create a scenario for the criminalization of women? That would be a states' rights issue. How do you deal with murder, all right, on a states' rights issue, right? But my position is, look at, I'm not going to, that's after the fact. We'll worry about that. I want the Supreme Court to answer one simple question. That's it. Answer that question, and we'll deal with the rest of it. At least the default position would be that these babies are constitutional persons, which they truly are. They always were. They truly are. The Supreme Court knows it. The other side knows it. And this is why Jim Havens and I beat our heads up against the wall every single day, because people like Ryan T. Anderson know it, yet they somehow think that we have to, and even if we have to educate the masses towards this, well, then Lila and Abby and all the rest of you is that tomorrow can start educating every single pro-lifer about the 14th Amendment. And Lila does it once in a while, but that message about the new North Star that she has and Kristen Hawkins, protection from conception, these messages they put out once in a while get lost in the deluge of messages that they put out about everything else, right? After the vice presidential debate, where they had the debate over that woman who died in Georgia, whether she died because of the abortion ban or whether she died because of chemical abortion. The social media was consumed with this. The mainstream corporate pro-life movement was consumed with this issue. And I said, if they spent as much time on constitutional person from the moment of conception, as they did on that one issue, all right, it would change the face of the pro-life movement, and people would have an aha moment, right? So again, the optimist says once Trump gets elected, that's the direction we're going in. We're hoping that this conference next week in Notre Dame is laying the groundwork for once Trump gets elected. That will be our focus. We'll rally around personhood and focus and demand Trump finally end it. I'm not optimistic that's really what's going on, because they talk about an amendment. It will. If Ryan T. Anderson's talking about an amendment, it's going to take 50 years. It's going to take but we don't need it. Why do you need an amendment? I mean, in 1858, post Dred Scott, pre-Civil War America, I always say that the difference between 1858, post Dred Scott, pre-Civil War America, and today is, number one, their issue was slavery, our issue is abortion. Back then, everybody was consumed with slave versus free, right? Nobody's consumed, with, constitutional rights versus no constitutional rights. In Texas, the pre-born have full constitutional rights. In New Mexico, right over the border, they have no constitution. Nobody's consumed with that. Nobody's talking about that. Nobody's saying, wait a second, how can that happen when you have the 14th Amendment? But the other thing, the other huge difference between 1858 or back in those days, versus today, is they did not have the 14th Amendment, and we do. This is a slam dunk. This is it, right? And so we are just incredible. So Jim and I, as much as we're lone wolves, I mean, this is why I come on your show. This is why I'm doing Zoom calls. This is why Jim is going to Notre Dame next week. We're lone because we just feel Mother Teresa said, look, we're not called to be successful, we're called to be faithful. We are called to proclaim this message in season, out of season, according to Evangelium Vitae, exalt, control, and that's what we're going to do. And at some point in time, the Holy Spirit will create that spark that he'll take to light the country on fire, whether it be the re-election of President Trump, whether it be finally Roe versus Wade being codified by the mass murderers of the preborn and the Supreme Court being forced to look at this. We don't know. And very possibly it'll be in a scenario where nobody can take the credit but our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. It may be one of those where things look so bleak, we're done, we've lost, and all of a sudden our Lord says, "No, here it is," right? But that is the answer right there, what I read you in the 14th. And I want to read you something else, and then, Joe, we can wrap this up, or I'll answer any other questions, right?
Sure.
It's interesting that the Catholic Church has the answer to this. It shouldn't be surprising. The Catholic Church has the answer to this. And the answer is so succinct. The answer is so simple. It's memorable. You can memorize it, right? But the majority of the Supreme Court is Catholic. The overwhelming majority of the leaders in the pro-life movement are Catholic. You look at how many leaders in the Republican Party are Catholic. You have the USCCB, right? And the conservative movement, how many Catholics? Candace Owens just became Catholic, all right? All right, so now remember the question. When did you, me, the Supreme Court, every single person in the United States, all right, when did we receive the constitutional rights that are enumerated in the 14th Amendment? That's a simple question we want answered. Here's Catechism 2270, right? Human life must be respected and protected absolutely from the moment of conception. From the first moment of their existence, a human being must be recognized as having the rights of a person, among which is the inviolable right of every innocent being to life. So isn't that interesting how clear it is, how simple it is if you look at the 14th Amendment, and for you Catholics out there, all right, 2270 in the Catechism, and somehow we're nowhere close to just screaming this at the top of our lungs, all right, until finally we're saying, okay, we get it, we get it, we get it, all right, yes, all right, this is the way it's got to be. All right, so again, rallyforpersonhood.com, I have a video right there. If it says attention, all Catholics, I have a video about this last part that I just talked about. And again, you can get my email address, anybody that's listening, and we can Zoom. All you have to do is email me. We'll set up a date for a Zoom meeting. And after we set up the date, you gather a half a dozen people into an office, into a ministry hall, into your home, and I will Zoom in and spend a half hour with you, just as I spent a half hour with you, Joe, and lay it all out, and everybody will say, Father, it's so simple. It is that simple. And sometimes when things are that simple, we say, no, it can't be. But nobody, Joe, in the years that I've been doing this, right, we've talked to, not one person has said to me and Jim, you guys are wrong. This is what you're missing. Not one person. Not one person.
Well, to me, that says it all. Father Stephen Imbarrato, thank you for joining us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Great conversation, important conversation. I'm going to take up your call, and I'm going to be praying for Lila Rose and Marjorie and Kristen and Father Pavone. Well, I can't call him Father, but Frank Pavone. I'm going to be praying for all of them to coalesce around what you're talking about and understand the importance of this. Like you said, that's not complicated. It's staring you right in the face. It's written in the 14th Amendment. How about we have the same will that our enemies do when it comes to fighting this? Same act of our will, both as individuals and our political will, and make it happen. Father Steve, as always, I'm going to share this all over the place. I'll share it with you later on. I ask everybody out there, hey, share it. Tag Kristen, tag Lila, tag all of them on X. It'll be on X, and share it in their comment box. We should all be, not in a negative way, we should all be coming together around what Father Stephen said, around the 14th Amendment. Thank you for joining us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Please share this video once again, and remember, until the next time, our conversation is yours. And remember, that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.